Alright, so for today's video, I actually want to make a part 2 of my previous video, which was 5 differences between the Walking Dead comics and the main show. And the reason why I'm making this video is because there are so many differences between the Walking Dead comics and the main show. Like, you can't put it into one video, so I just wanted to put it into parts. So yeah, please enjoy 5 more differences between the Walking Dead comics and the main show. And now, before we actually get into the video, I'd like to ask you all to like, share, and subscribe. And thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you guys so much for the growth. I really appreciate it. And let's get to that goal of 5,000 subscribers. So if you guys want to be part of this journey to 5,000 subscribers, please like, share, and subscribe and enjoy the video. Thank you. And now, before we actually get into the list, I wanted to structure this video the same way that I did the last video. So that means that this list is not in chronological order. It's not in some sort of order. It's not from least to best, right? It's just 5 differences. So yeah. And now the first difference I wanted to talk about is Carol's death. And in the show, Carol became a huge character because she didn't end up dying. She was supposed to die in the prison, like instead of T-Dog. T-Dog was actually supposed to be the one that survived, but the actor of T-Dog, he would make it late to the sets and stuff like that, so they just decided to kill off T-Dog in the prison instead of Carol. And I think that was a really good decision because Carol actually became one of the best characters. But in the comic books, Carol actually did end up dying, and the reason why she died was because she went into a deep depression because she was with Tyrese for a bit, and then Tyrese cheated on Carol with Michonne. So then she actually submitted herself to a walker, and a walker actually bit her. And now this is a huge difference between the comics and the show. And of course, as I mentioned before, Carol is one of the biggest characters in the main show, right? She's part of the main 4 in season 11, which are Maggie, Negan, Daryl, and Carol. Also, I did notice that Carol's character is so much more different than the comics, right? Because in the comics, Carol's character is just let's just say she's really annoying, right? She's not that great of a character, and it's actually Andrea who is the better character, and she's the one that's the better shot and all of that, and she ain't all that annoying in the comics. But in the show, Carol is actually a much better character, and she's developed so much. So I'm really happy that they didn't go with this route of her being killed off in the prison, and they actually gave her real character development. And she has one of the best character developments in the entire show beside Gabriel and Negan. And now, speaking of Carol's death, I think I should be getting into the second difference between the comics and the show, and that is that Sophia doesn't get lost, and also she does not die. And this was a huge moment in the show when Sophia actually got lost and she actually ended up dying, right? In the comics, that doesn't happen at all, right? She's perfectly fine. She's the one that actually stays alive, and she actually does become a pretty major character, later on in the comics. And also, she ends up getting adopted by Glenn and Maggie, and it's very surprising seeing that Glenn and Maggie actually do end up adopting Sophia. And she actually calls them mom and dad, and it does seem like that she's still processing the death of Carol, which actually did happen in front of her. And now, with Sophia actually staying alive in the comics, she actually does end up actually marrying Carl in the future, and she gets with Carl and all of that, and they actually do have a daughter. So again, it's very different from the show, right? Because in the show, both Carl and Sophia do end up dying, but in the comics, both of them actually do live on, and they're able to make a future. And now the third difference I wanted to talk about is Morgan. And of course, in the Walking Dead show, where Morgan actually does live on, and then he goes off into fear, and he is still alive at the moment. But in the comics, Morgan actually does end up going to Alexandria with the group, and he ends up dying in Alexandria. And how this happens is that when the walkers actually do end up overrunning Alexandria, and Carl actually does get his eye shot out, in that moment there, Morgan actually does get bit, and he does have the Tyrese death, where Michonne is actually forced to cut off his arm, but it's way too late because of too much blood loss and stuff like that, Morgan actually does end up dying. And you know, you compare this to the show, right? Morgan is actually a much more significant character, right? He's actually a way better character in the show. So I'm really happy that they actually, like, you know, developed his character, made him one of the best characters in the show, and you know, he went off into Fear and all of that. So you know, he's more like the Rick Grimes of Fear the Walking Dead. And you know, just like deaths like these does show, like, you know, the significant differences between the Walking Dead main show and the comics, right? Maybe some characters are not that significant in the comics, but then they make them really big in the show, right? And you know, I loved how they did that in the show, right? And they made Morgan one of the best characters, they made Carol one of the best characters, even though their characters weren't as big in the comics. And now the fourth difference I actually want to get into was Abraham's death. And as we all know in the show, Abraham is the one to be chosen by Negan at the lineup, and he's the one to die, right? And then it's actually followed up by Glenn. But in the comics, it's totally different, right? You know, Abraham actually does die even before Negan shows up, and Dwight is the one to kill Abraham. And you know, they actually did do this death in the show, but it wasn't Abraham, it was actually Denise. And you know, she dies the same exact way as Abraham did in the comics, you know, all of a sudden, and then while she's talking, like, you know, like an arrow goes through her head. And in the comics, it's actually like, you know, Abraham and Eugene walking, right? And then, you know, he's like talking to Eugene, and they're having this whole conversation, like a heart-to-heart conversation, and then all of a sudden, like you know, like an arrow actually goes through Abraham's eye. And this was one of the most shocking deaths in the comics, in my opinion, because Abraham became a pretty significant character in the comics, right? You know, he was technically Rick's right-hand man, right? Because Daryl was not in the comics, so it was kind of like Abraham and Rick, right? These two were kind of the duo in the comic books. And then all of a sudden, you know, you just have a character like Abraham dying like out of nowhere by Dwight, and you know, they just did not know what to do. And you know, you just see Dwight on a motorcycle, and you know, he's chasing them down and stuff like that. It was just very surprising seeing Abraham die that way. And in my opinion, it was disappointing both in the show and in the comics as well, because, you know, I wish that they kept Abraham around longer, especially in the show, right? Because Abraham became such a good character, right? His character development was actually really good. And then, you know, he was the one to be chosen by Negan. And, you know, I always wonder, like, how Abraham would have been in All Out War, how he would have been in the Commonwealth arc or the Whisperer arc, right? Because he was the strongest in the group physically, because like he was actually a soldier, right? Like he was actually like a military commander, I believe. And you know, it just would have been really interesting, you know, just seeing Abraham, you know, going against Negan, and you know, being in All Out War, and just seeing his character change, and you know, his reaction to Carl's death and how that would have changed him. And now the fifth difference I want to talk about is that Terminus does not exist in the comics. And you know, in the main show, Terminus is one of the most famous arcs in the main show, right? Because like that is when The Walking Dead really peaked. And I believe that the season 5 premiere, like the first episode of season 5, was the most viewed episode of The Walking Dead, probably one of the most viewed episodes in TV history, right? And you know, just like everybody around the world was watching Walking Dead in those seasons, like season 4, season 5, right? You know, that is when the show really peaked. And you know, just Terminus not being in the comics, but there are actually remnants of Terminus. For example, like, you know, the cannibals, right? They actually do track down the group in the comics. And you know, just like another side difference I wanted to point out is that because Bob is not in the comics, it's actually Dale that gets his leg eaten by the cannibals, and he's the one to actually say tainted meat, and you know, just to scream that out. But let's get back into Terminus. Now, I think that adding Terminus was one of the best decisions for the main show, right? Because it was one of the best arcs in the Walking Dead show, right? I still rewatch those episodes, right? You know, I just, like, you know, just Rick Grimes in those episodes was just insane, right? And we could all agree that Season 5 Rick was the best version of Rick. And you know, it's kind of debatable when it comes to Season 8 or Season 5 Rick, but in my personal opinion, Red Machete Rick with the big beard in the show was the best iteration of Rick Grimes, right? And you know, season 8 does come second, but like season 5 Rick is where he really became, like, you know, a force to be reckoned with. But of course, like, you know, in the comics, when Rick actually does kill the cannibals, we do get a very cool, like, you know, moment where Rick actually does confront them, and like, you know, and Andrea and the rest of the group, like Abraham and stuff like that, they actually are hiding in the bushes, like how in the show, like, Rick kills Gareth in the church, right? And in the comics, it's actually outside the church, it's in the woods. And you know, it's a very cool scene where, like, you know, Rick, he actually does direct Andrea to shoot, like, you know, their fingers and stuff like that, and then, like, in front of Gabriel, he actually does kill the cannibals one by one, which is a very disturbing scene. And it's kind of like in the show, right, where Rick and the group, they actually do kill, like, you know, Gareth in the church and stuff like that, and it's a pretty brutal scene where Gabriel, he's looking at them with horror. We get the same exact thing in the comics, but the difference is that Terminus is not in the comics and it's in the TV show. And personally, Terminus was one of the best show only stories that they've ever made, because, like, you know, right after Terminus, we actually do get the arc of Beth being taken, and again, that wasn't a great like, you know, arc, right? It was the 2-3 episodes and it didn't really have much of a payoff. But definitely Terminus did stick with the group in a very bad way, because they weren't able to trust the people of Alexandria all that much because of their experiences with Terminus. So we could actually see that Terminus did stick with the group later on in the show as well. And now that's it for today's video. I hope you all liked it. Please like, share, and subscribe, and let me know if you guys want another part of this series, right? Like, you know, differences between the Walking Dead comics and the main show. Please comment down your ideas and, you know, what you felt about the video, and if you guys want another part of it as well. And yeah, I just hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you guys so much for the growth. This channel has gone a very long way, right? You know, compared to a 2 months ago, right? You know, it's actually very hard to believe that, you know, this channel has grown so much so fast, and this is all because of your guys' support. So thank you guys so much for the support and for the growth. I really appreciate it. And we have a goal in mind for 5,000 subscribers. So again, please like, share, and subscribe, and let's reach that goal of 5,000 subscribers. Thank you.